Welcome to another broadcast of Majoring in the Majors on the Artist First Radio Network. All past broadcasts are podcasts. You can find them at artistfirst.com. Your host, Pastor S.J. Munson, is the author of two books, The Treasure of Israel and Christ Held Hostage, The Hijacking of Christianity. Find them wherever great books are sold. Now, here he is, your host, Pastor S.J. Munson.
Hi, this is S.J. Munson, and welcome to Majoring in the Majors. Many people today despise the church, or at the very least mistrust the church, because so often in its history it has allied itself with secular power, such as the Byzantine Empire, the Russian Empire in the East, and the Holy Roman Empire, the papacy in the West. One thinks of fascist Spain, and now, of course, in the U.S., a large part of the evangelical church has become enthralled to a racist and authoritarian government. But there is another story, a more heroic story of individuals who have stood up and spoken truth to power. One thinks of St. Ambrose and St. John Chrysostom, both in the early church. St. Catherine of Siena, of course, in the modern era, people like Lizzie Jennings, Kai Munk, Dr. King. Too many to make a list here, but tonight we're going to talk about speaking truth to power, both the courage and the cost, and what it means to follow a God of truth. We have with us Dr. Sister Vassa Larin. She is an Orthodox Christian Riasafor nun, and we'll talk about what that means too, as well as a liturgiologist and professor of practical theology of the Kiev Orthodox Theological Academy. She's the author of many scholarly articles, as well as a monograph on Byzantine hierarchical liturgy, and other books such as Reflections with Morning Coffee, Lent with Sister Vassa, A Healthy Fast Lenten Guidebook, and most recently, Praying in Time, The Hours and Days in Step with Orthodox Christian Tradition, which has now been translated into Italian, Greek, and German. Her online mission includes weekly audio podcasts called Monday Morning Coffee, on the practical applications of the liturgical calendar and scripture, a video course on divine liturgy available on YouTube, and other YouTube videos on Orthodox theology, tradition, and contemporary church canonical issues. Sister Vassa has been in the news recently because while a nun in the Russian Orthodox Church, she spoke out against the Russian invasion of Ukraine, for which she was stripped of her monastic vows by the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia, which is an Orthodox jurisdiction under the authority of Moscow, and she has since been welcomed into the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which is now under the Patriarchate of Constantinople. To get started, welcome, Sister Vassa. Thank you for making time for us.
Thank you, SJ, for inviting me, and hello to all your listeners.
To get started, perhaps you could tell us about the fact that you were a nun. You took a vow of obedience. You obviously did not start out with the intention of becoming a lightning rod or controversial figure.
I did not take any vows, SJ, because I'm a Riasafor nun.
Okay. And what does that mean?
It means that it's like the first step. There are different steps into becoming a full-fledged nun. And although I have been in monastic clothing since I was 19, but I went through these various initial steps, and then my archbishop sent me to study, and also it's a little bit of a long story, but I ended up having this mission of teaching outside of a convent. I taught for many years at the University of Vienna in Austria. After I got this education and, my master's degree and then a doctorate in Orthodox Christian Byzantine liturgiology, also part of my degree was canon law and Byzantine history. So I went through all that, was invited to teach at the University of Vienna, which is why I moved to Vienna from where I lived initially. So it's a bit of a long story, but I ended up sharing, and I don't like to think of it as teaching, but sharing what I studied online through various videos and podcasts in an online mission that's called Coffee with Sister Vassa. So That's what I have been doing for over 10 years. And I have paid subscribers that fully crowdfund my little mission, that has also on and off sometimes a few assistants, like a little team that helps me out to produce things and run the website and do various other things. I also travel a lot and speak both at universities and churches in various parts of the world. But because of this public outreach through the internet and social media, some of the things that I say can breach or concern the church hierarchy, that is, the bishops of my particular jurisdiction, which was, until recently, the church jurisdiction into which I was born as the daughter of a Russian Orthodox priest in Nyack, New York. So I'm an American citizen, and I was born and raised just outside New York City. And I ended up entering a convent before that whole journey I just described. I initially entered a convent in France. So this is like an international story because of the fact that my church jurisdiction is the Russian Orthodox Church abroad that has convents, monasteries, and church parishes in different countries.
Right.
So I started talking about the war in Ukraine when it flared up because of the full-fledged Russian invasion of that country. And it concerned me because I already for years have been publicly elucidating and sharing certain aspects of Orthodox Christian canonical tradition, and the kinds of principles and faith-inspiring information that we glean for our everyday life from living that tradition. So I would cover the lives of the saints, little lessons that come out of the lives of the saints that we have in something called the church calendar, commemorating the saints, internalizing some of the inspiring messages that come through their trials and overcoming them, and having faith and hope and love, throughout their trials, things like that. And the gospel, of course, at the center of it, and our Lord Jesus Christ and his cross-carrying way. And I try to weave that, through my work and my little podcasts and courses and videos. I try to, testify to how this tradition can inform and inspire a life in, not in a convent or a monastery, but in the present day world. Because I myself ended up, because of this journey and the way that my work in my church developed, and the way it was also blessed by the church hierarchy, I ended up myself living in a big city. I live already for 17 years in the center of Vienna, Austria, a capital European city, and in the thick of the life of the city in a way. Nonetheless, I am a nun, and I do live on my own, but I'm attuned to the modern day life and the challenges of also online information sharing and imbibing the kind of constant information that comes at us or to us through social media. And it's through that media that I share my own walk, my own walk in faith. So basically, when the whole issue came up of this phenomenon, or this cataclysm or catastrophe of the war of Russia against Ukraine, because I happen to have been since my childhood. At this point, I'm 54, and I live in basically in Eastern Europe, and Ukraine is not that far away. And I also had a Ukrainian family that through friends of friends, I was asked to help because they showed up soon after the war started. They showed up in Vienna, Austria, and somebody asked me, could you help these people out? So my little team and I were sort of taking care of this family for 7 months. And through that, and also through the fact that I started noticing how the church in Russia, of which I am, was until recently, part, how the church started to throw its support behind this war and eventually even declared it a holy war. That's written in capital letters. There's a document that the Patriarch of Moscow, called Patriarch Kirill, put out, defending this military effort to subject Ukraine and to bring it under Russian influence that he declared to be somehow very holy, and proclaimed that the West, that Ukraine supposedly is being influenced by, that the West has fallen into Satanism. These are all quotes of what actually has been said explicitly, not only by this patriarch, but by the patriarch and also by leading hierarchs and other clergy and people of the Russian Orthodox Church. So what is really a new form of fascism that's defending killing people in the name of an ideology that's supposedly holy. This is something that I also, from a perspective of having been born and raised in this tradition, found it impossible not to say something about, and also the ways in which the patriarch and other leading clergy were persecuting actually those who opposed the war in their own ranks. They were defrocking priests in Russia. That means that they were, deposing them of their priesthood, which is a possibility in, Orthodox tradition, for simply refusing to support the war. And some of them had to flee Russia because they were also threatened with being arrested and might have been, might have been facing prison sentences for having opposed the war in some very subtle way also. There's very brutal persecutions going on, not only in Russia, but also in the territories occupied by Russia in Ukraine. If you're not, if you're, for example, a Protestant pastor on the occupied territories, or you are an Orthodox priest in those territories who does not agree to enter into or subject oneself to the Moscow Patriarchate in those territories, you really are in danger and might also be, in fact, arrested, imprisoned. We have tens of cases of these, of priests and pastors in those territories. There are documentaries about it that you could find on YouTube. At this point, there are, pastors and priests now in prison. There are also those that have been executed because of these persecutions. So these things that I've also made, I should not exaggerate my little role. Nonetheless, it created a problem for, surprisingly, actually, not explicitly for someone in Moscow or in Russia in the church hierarchy, but for my hierarchy that happens to be Western bishops that are officially autonomous or independent of the Moscow Central Church Authority, but they are tied canonically to the patriarch in Moscow. And what has happened is that when the war started, they seemed to not have any coherent message condemning the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Their message has been of now, for any listeners that might be confused, I'm just going to stress that, or explain that there is this church jurisdiction called the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia. That's the jurisdiction in which I was born and raised outside New York City. Since I was born in 1970 and raised in the Cold War years in this Russian and Russian-speaking sort of ghetto, you can say. We were quite closed and, living according to our tradition kind of community of Russian Orthodox people in the United States. And so, we maintained the Russian Orthodox tradition, but before the collapse of the Soviet Union and before the early 2000s, I should say, we were very separate from the Moscow Church Center. In fact, we didn't have any communion with them because throughout the Cold War years, the church outside Russia did not agree with the collaborationism, that is the kind of synchronicity that was happening between the Russian church in the Soviet Union and the Soviet state, because they were, they came to be sort of part of the same regime. The Russian church was serving the interests also outside Russia, the geopolitical interests of the Soviet regime. So what we see happening today is that now that the Putin regime has become so fascist and militant and attacking neighboring countries, not only Ukraine, they did it before, but most egregiously, I should point out, in Georgia in 2008, they illegally occupied 2 regions of the country of Georgia. That's an ongoing situation. They have devastated those areas of Ossetia and Abkhazia, of previously, of the sovereign country of Georgia. They also, violating international law, occupied Crimea in 2012, 2014, perhaps? And the most recent crimes that they're committing, also crimes against humanity in Ukraine, that full-fledged invasion, although it was preceded by years of occupying and creating chaos in 2 regions of Ukraine, but the full-scale invasion that began in February 24th, 2022, the Russian armies proceeded to do all sorts of atrocious things in Ukraine and to increasingly target civilians. That's what's been escalating since January 20th of this year, since the new administration in the White House. There has been an escalation, actually, in the Russian targeting of civilian, apartment buildings in major cities. I myself visited Kiev a few months ago and was woken up at night because the sirens went off and the Shahed drones and also ballistic missiles were launched on the city of Kiev. 2 kilometers from us, a building was bombed within the city, about a mile away, I want to say, within the city center. And, I had to go, we didn't go into a bunker, but deeper into a corridor, like you have to go where there are no windows. That was the level of you could look it up. There's an app that Ukrainians use to assess what the danger is when a siren goes off. They're already used to it. But anyway, I was woken up and I experienced the kind of, the fear really one can feel, and how vulnerable one can feel, and the sleep that the people of Ukraine lose also constantly from these constant bombardments.
It must be terrifying.
So, yeah. It's also terrifying to see people used to it in a way, because they have their, on the one hand, one sees their resistance, that they are hardened and resisting and not by any means giving up. The people who have remained in Ukraine, because many have left Ukraine, but those who remain and who really have warded off an army, Russia's army is 3 times larger than the little Ukrainian army, but the Ukrainians are warding them off for the 4th year in a row. And finally, President Trump has even admitted it only 2 days ago. He finally said that Russia is failing at this war, and any, self-respecting superpower would have long ago defeated Ukraine. Ukraine is tiny next to Russia. If you look at the map, it's 40 times smaller, geographically speaking, than Russia. And Russia has not been able, actually this is a statistic, I didn't just think it up, but the following statistic is true, that in the last 1,000 days of this war, Russia has not been able to gain more than 1%. It's less than 1% of Ukrainian land that they have been able to advance on in the last 1,000 days. The progress that they did make, in their sense, progress of, snatching land that does not belong to them, of the sovereign country of Ukraine, that happened in the early phases of the war. But Kremlin propaganda wants us to believe that, Ukraine is crumbling and Russia is ever advancing. It's hopeless for Ukraine. They might as well give up. That's not actually true. Russia's economy is really crumbling. This is actually some kind of a miracle. I mean, I do pray every single day, along with many other people, for Ukraine to be able to ward off the Russian threat, because this is not a question of a land grab. It's a question of differing values. We do have in the West and in democratic countries, despite our tendency, that's also healthy, to be self-critical, we know that we have our issues. We know that we have our faults, and there is no ideal society. But we do also know that we value something like freedom, like basic freedoms, the freedom of speech, without which we as Christians, I don't know if everybody listening to this is a Christian, but certainly in the Christian tradition, regardless of whether it's Western, Eastern, Catholic, Protestant, Anglican, whatever, or Orthodox, we do believe that it's very important to be able to share the word of God that we make our own, that we're called to testify to, to bear witness to. If we're not able to share the word freely and according to our conscience, this is a problem for Christians, but it's not the kind of problem that makes them stop sharing the word. St. Paul writes that the word of God cannot be bound, cannot be chained. He writes that when he's in prison. And he lost his head eventually for that. St. Paul was beheaded by his state authorities, the Roman authorities, because the word of God could not be bound. All they could do was kill him to make him stop speaking. And even that didn't stop the spread of the words of St. Paul, even until our day. So there are heroic Christians in those areas that are threatened by Russian neo-fascism, that somehow wants to present itself as, as something that is religious, you might hear, if you follow this stuff, you might hear that Putin stands for traditional values, that he stands for family values, that he's someone who is against, his regime is supposedly seeking to protect his citizens against LGBTQ propaganda. This is the type of language that the Kremlin propaganda uses, mainly, I have to say, as a Russian who follows Russian news, and Russian is my native tongue, and I know what it is that they say internally. It's actually for external consumption to appeal to certain kinds of far-right, especially American kinds of demographics, like certain far-right religious Christian groups, including Orthodox Christians, who are politically interested in this agenda of family values, of standing up to trans, to what these demographics see as trans, amorality and threats to family structures. This kind of fear mongering about the gays, the trans people, mainly that, actually. It's mainly those issues that Putin tries to appeal to or raise, as if it's different in Russia, or as if Russia is this bastion of Christian morality, which it by no means is. The actual statistics of both, the rates of divorce, of alcoholism, of abortion rates, of along all of those parameters that are usually seen as congruent with quote unquote family values, Russia is in the lead for a lot of those statistics. A very high rate of abortion, a very high rate of divorces, over 50% of marriages ending in divorce, and then this kind of waging of war that just throws hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers as just cannon fodder without any coherent strategy in the military sense at the people that they're fighting against, indiscriminately, and not valuing even the lives of their own people. So I could go on and on about what I've learned in observing this, in visiting those countries. I've been to Russia many, many times. In the last decade of my life, I served. I was appointed, actually. Ironically speaking, now it sounds ironic, but the Patriarch Kirill himself appointed me to two of the highest commissions of the Moscow Patriarchate as a professional, as a scholar, to commissions of the Russian Orthodox Church for canon law and for questions of liturgy, meaning, church services. Anyway, because of this work that I did until recently, I'm familiar with that culture, with also with the differences of the usual principles of life that people follow or don't follow, in the place of my birth, the United States, and I can compare it to what I encounter in a country like Russia. And I should say that the usual, just everyday life of an American citizen, as far as things like corruption and morality go, and just what is considered normal or not normal, is really a lot more Christian, even for people who aren't, practicing or believing Christians. But we have I would say, in our everyday life, I find, somebody might tell me this is somehow not so, but in the United States I grew up in, you wouldn't do things that in Russia are considered normal. Like if you're stopped for speeding on the highway, you wouldn't immediately bribe the police officer and get let go. Whereas in Russia, that's totally normal. Everybody knows how much you pay the police officer, and then you don't get get written up as someone who was speeding. You don't have everyday normal corruption in these situations. In Russia, you can't do anything. You can't get your child into a university, or even sometimes in some major universities in Russia, you can't pass a test without bribing the professor that needs to be bribed. But there are other more egregious and sinister aspects of the not Christian culture in Russia, because of course it's tragic, but they did endure almost a century of militant atheism under communism, and this is not something that's been overcome. It's not something that's without consequences. Putin is a product of that culture of militant atheism. He himself, not being in our sense a Christian, he has superstitious beliefs in all sorts of things. He consults shamans and is into some pagan and occultic stuff. This is a separate story, but I'm speaking to what we as Christians would react to and speak out against normally, not as some kind of a heroic thing to say. It's normal to say this is not a holy war. That's simply what I have been saying. It's not church teaching. It's definitely against our faith. And my heart cries out also because of personal connections to and geographical proximity, actually, to this war that's also threatening to be globalized, or at least to spill over into Europe. Europe is, mobilizing. Europe is concerned. The Trump administration has not showed itself to be with the usual allies of the United States. I don't need to probably get into that. So yeah, I would not agree with any assessment of what I've been saying as in any way heroic. I feel like this is like trying to argue with people that the earth is round. Speaking about these things.
Right. So, as we talked about earlier, and you mentioned as well, there is a tradition in the church of speaking out, of stepping up and speaking out against injustice, of speaking truth to power. Do you have any heroes from the past or present that you draw inspiration from?
Yes, I certainly draw a lot of inspiration from Alexei Navalny, who was executed by the Putin regime. If anybody hasn't heard of Alexei Navalny, he was an Orthodox Christian and an opposition politician in modern-day Russia. And I think has it already been 2 years? I don't know, it feels like a long time. But I have a photograph hanging of Alexei Navalny right here in my apartment in Vienna, Austria. And he was arrested because Alexei Navalny spoke out against the corruption of the Putin regime. He was not allowed to be a candidate, even though he was very popular. Well, people argue as to how popular he was, but insofar as it was possible to participate in elections in Russia, he tried to participate, and at every step, the Putin regime was trying to, not let his voice be heard. But he had a team and he used social media and YouTube very effectively with his team to expose corruption in Russia. But Alexei Navalny, who did not engage in politics from the perspective of, look, I'm a Christian, I'm going to tell you, what is morally right from the perspective of the gospel, he did not wear his faith on his sleeve. And a lot of what we know about his faith has been revealed in his diaries, even though he did speak about it during his lifetime. It's just that he didn't use it as his political platform, but he was, by vocation, a politician. He showed us also that being a politician can be a Christian vocation. It's not dirty business, necessarily. So he was a civil servant and very much a servant of the people. So Alexei wrote, there's a book that was published that includes his prison diaries that he kept and where he talks about his faith. It's published also in English. He wrote it in Russian, but it's an autobiography of Alexei Navalny, who was executed in the Arctic region after he had been arrested. He was also transferred into this penal colony of the Putin, the Gulag that's been resurrected during the Putin years. So he was kept in solitary confinement, tortured, finally poisoned, as it's been shown now. It's really incredible to read the kind of joy and hope and faith in Jesus Christ, in the resurrection, him defying death, him showing such even joy in the face of this very brutal regime. He did not fear. Alexei kept saying what he was saying, despite the fact that they tried to kill him a different way before his imprisonment. The Putin regime poisoned him with a nerve agent, with this very dangerous chemical. His life was just barely saved by people who stepped in. He was taken to Germany and treated in this famous German clinic. Then he had to relearn how to walk, how to speak. He was completely, he was very close to death from this chemical that was actually developed in Russian laboratories. So it's not even something, you touch just a trace of this and you die. So it was some kind of, it's called novichok. Anyway, this Alexei Navalny writes in his diaries that his primary goal is to seek the kingdom of heaven, and that he trusts that good old Jesus will take Jesus. He writes, these are the last words in his diaries, and he trusts that good old Jesus and his family, that is Jesus's family, will take care of the rest of his headaches. He speaks, in very simple ways about faith, but it's just extraordinary. He said things like, I don't believe in the existence of death, which is a very Christian thing to say. Death has been defeated by our resurrected Lord. But he also very much, Alexei Navalny had a very strong sense of vocation. He said that people could not understand why he returned to Russia. Because after they tried to poison him and he survived, he was in Germany because, they treated him in Germany. He could have stayed in Germany. But he said, my home is Russia. I belong, I believe in the bright future of Russia. The way that he expressed it was he can't not follow his vocation. Vocation is a powerful thing because it comes from God. And he said, I do not fear, going to where I belong. And I will continue to speak. He said famously when he landed in the airport, and soon after that, right at the airport, they arrested him. And that was the last that he, walked freely. But he really was demonstrating this fearlessness of those who might kill us in the body, but can't kill our soul. And it's that kind of standing up to brutal regimes that overcomes eventually those brutal regimes. That's what the martyrs did, in the age of the ancient martyrs. They would stand up to, the all-powerful Roman Empire. So we see some extraordinary heroes today that have everything to lose in physical, material terms. Alexei Navalny, who died at age 47, is survived by his very devoted and beautiful wife, Yulia, who carries on his message. He has two beautiful and talented children, Dasha, and Zahar, Alexei Navalny's son. Dasha's in her early 20s and graduated, I think, already from Stanford. Anyway, I just wanted to say that we have Alexei Navalny is not the only one, but he's probably the brightest, best known example. But the other example that are my heroes are definitely the people of Ukraine, because I was very inspired and invigorated after my trip to Kiev in Ukraine the last time I was there. I just, because you see, not constant, but yeah, almost every day, I have to say, I saw somewhere nearby and heard the sounds of the way they do funerals of soldiers. You hear this little orchestra playing, like with trumpets and I don't know what other instruments, but you hear this melody and they march and everybody, as they carry, say, what is it called in English? The body. What is the box called that they put it in?
The casket or coffin?
Exactly, casket. So they're carrying the casket through the streets and people stop what they're doing and kneel, like they bend one knee or they make the sign of the cross. So on the one hand, you see these funerals happening of soldiers that have fallen. And I visited cemeteries, more than one, and memorials all over the place, of this, just memorials to this ongoing fight against this foe, this huge menace that's attacking the country, that's attacking the values, that wants to subject Ukraine to this authoritarian rule. You see, it's not about Ukraine fearing losing land. It's that it won't be over. They will be subjected. They will be forbidden to speak Ukrainian. They will not be able to profess also the faith that they choose, because in the occupied Russian the territories occupied now by Russia, you are not allowed. A lot of people don't know this, but the occupying forces are not friendly to any also Christian churches that are not specifically the Moscow Patriarchate. Even the Orthodox Church of Ukraine is persecuted there. Like, you can't be of a different denomination or jurisdiction other than the Moscow Patriarchate. And there's brutal persecution if you're not. So they don't want to live, like that. They don't want to serve some kind of idol, because an ideology that is not faith in the true God is an idol. And idols demand sacrifices that we shouldn't be making. People who were pagans offered sacrifices to idols that they shouldn't have been making. That's what Christians refuse to do. That's what's happening with this, I would say, anti-church in Russia. It's supposedly a church. It's like simulating or imitating church vestments and even terminology. It's quoting scripture in order to justify a war, in order even to propagate a war, to intensify it as if it's for a holy cause. It's really quite it's blood kind of curdling stuff. It's very scary.
Now, we've been talking with Dr. Sister Vassa Larin. She's a nun, scholar, author, and professor in the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, and her books and podcasts can be found on her website, coffeewithsistervassa.com. And we'll have...
Yes, coffeewithsistervassa.com, all one word, Coffee with Sister Vassa.
And we'll have those...
VASSA, exactly, yeah.
And we'll have those links available for you on our Artist First show page. If you are a regular listener or just tuned in for the first time, we'd love to hear from you. So drop us a line at majoringinthemajors@gmail.com. Thank you, Sister Vassa, for making time to speak with us and sharing a very moving story about what's happening in Ukraine. God bless you in your very important work. And this is
Thank you, SJ.
This is Pastor S.J. Munson signing off.